I'm with Jane McLelland. So actually, Jane, you're the first person I've ever invited to be on my channel. My channel has been me talking. I have over 300 videos, and I've been invited on other people's channel, but you're the first to actually be on mine. This is your book, How to Starve Cancer, and it was published last year, 2018. What month did it come out?
Came out, well, that particular paperback came out in September.
Okay.
So it hasn't been out that long, less than a year.
Okay, so this is an absolutely fascinating story. So let me give some background from my viewpoint, then I'll have you chime in and give your background. So my avid subscribers on YouTube have seen me talk about the mechanism of chronic disease being lactic acidosis, especially for heart disease and cancer and diabetes, and is where the body's using lactate or fermenting lactate or excessive glycolysis and not enough mitochondria power, and that can reverse a lot of disease. And what you're saying in this book is there are other forms of fuel that cancer cells use, so they can use some proteins, they can use ketones, and they can switch. They can burn fat, and then they can switch over to glycolysis, and then you have to go after the various fuels that cancer cells could potentially use to make their energy and to make their structure. So I had a patient who he had PSA of 200, prostate cancer, and he went on a ketogenic diet. So his ketones are up, his fat is up in his blood, and his PSA went to over 1,000. And that's not supposed to happen that way, but you explain it well in this book about how prostate cancer cells love fat. So when he emailed me a week and a half ago with his story, and now his PSA is 0.67, and then he sent me this book and some more information, so I ordered it immediately, and I got through it, read through this past week. So anyways, it's super interesting information. So you had cancer diagnosis in 94, right? At the age of 30, it was cervical cancer. So go ahead, tell us your story.
Okay, so in 94, first diagnosis, did everything usual, so chemo, radiotherapy, massive surgery. Then in 99, it developed in my lungs, and so that was deemed stage 4. Very short prognosis meant to be for that stage. And then I was managing it with intravenous vitamin C and lots of complementary protocols on top of, I effectively had 6 months worth of quite powerful chemotherapy, some of which really destroyed my immune system. But actually the amount of chemo and radiotherapy that I had then led to me having myelodysplasia in my blood in 2003 as a result of the chemo and the radiotherapy, which was behaving in a different way. And I couldn't work out why I was controlling one cancer and not the other, because my SCC markers for my cervical cancer were still in normal range, but this other marker, which is the TM2PK in my blood, which measures the glycolysis, was completely out of range. It was a range of nearly 400 when it should have been less than 15. So it was a panic station for me. And then I started looking beyond complementary things. I then added off-label drugs. So I looked into drugs, waded through lots of research to try and find old drugs that might help, because whatever I was doing from the complementary side wasn't enough. Clearly, there weren't many options left for me with conventional care, because I'd done the chemo, I'd done all of that, and I couldn't have any more. So I had to find another route. So I took an antiplatelet drug, which is normally prescribed for stroke patients. And then I took a cholesterol drug. So I took lovastatin, which was one of the first statin drugs to come out, which lowers your cholesterol. And Todolac is normally an arthritis drug, a very strong non-steroidal anti-inflammatory. And this has quite powerful cancer-killing effects, but you have to take it at high dose, which is, Todolac is less, it's a COX-2 inhibitor without the COX-1. It's more, well, but all of these non-steroidals can be quite damaging on the gut, and I certainly found that. I was, a little bit sensitive afterwards, but, what was the choice? I take that or die. I wanted to do something that would make a difference, and I wasn't sure how much of a difference it would make because this was uncharted waters. So I had no idea whether this was actually going to help or not, but I had to try something.
So let me stop you right there.
cocktail.
Let me stop you right there.
Yeah.
So you took the statin drug to
Yeah.
reduce the fat in the bloods to starve the cancer. You took the
Well, I didn't understand the starving effects, particularly at that point. At that point, I had in my head that might be an idea, but I didn't quite know how it would, I didn't know the pathways it was working on back then. In fact, nobody did. Nobody understood how statins really worked back in 2003. All the research has come out since, so I've been able to work it out in much greater detail, which is why I go into much more biochemical detail in part 2 of my book. But when I was doing it back then, I just found research that showed that people with my type of cancer were getting stability for 7 months whilst they were taking lovastatin. And then I found another piece of research that showed if you take a strong non-steroidal like etodolac and then you combine it with a statin, then the cancer killing effect, the apoptosis effect, was 5 times greater than just using the non-steroidal on its own. So I just thought that there was synergy. I didn't realize how much synergy there would be between the statin and the dipyridamole, which was something I discovered later as well. There's been some very interesting research on both of those stopping different cholesterol pathways, and that's the reason why they work very synergistically, those two together.
So this dipyridamole, that's the antiplatelet.
Yeah.
And so what I read in your book is that
right.
if you have your blood clumping, then the metastatic cancer cells, they can take hold and grow from there, right? So you want to keep your blood slippery. You don't want to have any clumping in your blood, right? Yeah.
And I actually initially I was when I first discovered how sticky my blood was and this problem that I had in my blood, the first thing I started taking again was obviously aspirin. But then once I discovered about the etodolac, I stopped the aspirin and then switched to etodolac.
Which is another NSAID. It's another NSAID, but it's a stronger, right? Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a non-aspirin,
right.
non-steroidal. So but I didn't want to take them both together because that really would have wrecked my gut.
Yeah.
But they have different effects on the cancer cells. So in fact, aspirin has effects on its own, but in fact, particularly combining it with a drug like metformin or berberine, because I was taking berberine back then as well, and nobody else knew about berberine as a supplement. It was only available to me in tincture form. It's come across this research in the Journal of Herbal Medicine, which discussed berberine as being very much like, metformin. But I didn't really understand metformin at that time. I wasn't sure whether what the implications of insulin were. I just was worried I might make things worse with metformin back then. So I was a bit worried about adding that in until, in fact, in 2007, when I added metformin into my compendium of drugs at that point. But so it's been an ongoing sort of research. I'm an ongoing guinea pig.
Right. So let's talk about the metformin and the berberine. So metformin drops blood sugar, insulin, and it has its own anti-cancer effects. And berberine also has anti-cancer effects plus other things.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And they overlap a lot, actually. They cover a lot of the same pathways, but not all of them. And everybody thinks they're totally interchangeable, and they're really not.
Right.
That's my metro map, which I just describe in my book as sort of the way that cancer can sort of use its fuels. People are probably looking at that thinking, what?
Right. And when you're saying pathways, you're meaning like this is different ways that the cancer cells create acetyl-CoA to make fuel, but these are the pathways. And the pathways are listed in the black font, and then the potential therapies to block them or whatever, that's within the colored bars. So this is the way to think of a cancer cell.
It's the cancer stem cell, which is really key here. Most therapies around at the moment are the chemo, the radiotherapy, immunotherapies, whatever. They are targeting the fast dividing cell, but what they're not getting is the cancer stem cell. And these cancer stem cells are very much slower growing, slower dividing, but they're the ones that are metabolically flexible. So they can use different fuels and they can switch from one fuel to another. And the three sides of my triangle really denote the three main fuels, which are glucose, which is on the right, glutamine on the left in the blue, and then down at the bottom are the fatty acid pathways.
Right.
So really what happens, fat gets taken up, and then this you get beta oxidation of the mitochondria, and then you get an upregulation of the glycolysis and the glutaminolysis. But you also get, if you can also get an upregulation of your normal OXPHOS pathways as well. And this is where cancer is different to many other diseases, where you just get lactate produced by one way. Cancer is very flexible. This is why it's a complex disease that needs a complex approach. Although actually, it's once you understand this, and it's really, it might look very complicated from there, but it's simply a matter of just trying to block the glucose, the glutamine, and the fat. And
right.
The point is to just try.
Yeah. So here's
that's my very basic thought.
Right. So
when I was creating my my triangle, that was my initial thoughts, that I wanted, carb, fat, and protein are the three macros in the diet. And then that to me, well, the Dipyridamole to me initially, it just was a nucleoside transport inhibitor, so it stopped the uptake of nucleosides, which are little chunks of DNA, because the cancer cell's pretty lazy. It'll just scoop up the DNA and use it for itself if it can. But it's also got a great affinity for fat, Dipyridamole, so it actually holds it in the blood without actually allowing it to get into the cancer cell.
So it addresses both.
So I was fixated on Dipyridamole at the time. I thought would only work on the protein, but actually I then since discovered that it was working on this alternative cholesterol pathway as well. So it also works on a fat pathway. So actually that was my basic start, where glucose was being blocked by either metformin and berberine, and then the fat I was using the lovastatin, but it has, it's morphed. That triangle morphed then into my MetroMap, but that was kind of my initial very basic approach.
Right.
That's what happened.
Yeah, and it's brilliant. It's awesome. Do people ever claim that you don't have any science to back up what you're saying? Because it's all science. It's all, everything in your book is science.
I'm very chuffed by that. And I've also got lots of the researchers who are very into the metabolic side, who also love it. So far, nobody has said that it's a load of rubbish.
Okay, good.
They all stand right behind it and are very excited by it, actually.
So as I was reading through your book, one thing came to mind from like your viewpoint and my viewpoint in my practice. So I've been doing hardcore holistic nutrition since 1998. And this is similar to how I see the body. So the body's here, and the various problems would be organ dysfunction, heavy metals, parasites, that kind of stuff. And so here's the body. I'm addressing the body all around like this. I'm thinking with all these different aspects of what can tear down the body. But when you apply it to cancer, it's the same way of thinking. It's very holistic. You got to think of all of it all at the same time. Not that all of it applies. Some of it applies, and some of the big things apply most of the time. But it's still the same viewpoint. And what's interesting is like cancer, it's its own animal. It's its own entity that's taking over. So it's just the same sort of thinking that. And then another thing I want to say is too, I was at a seminar once given by I would call him a holistic farmer. And the way that he spoke, he has that same viewpoint when you look at, addressing fields and soil and plants and animals. It's got to be that holistic viewpoint. Now, throughout all the research that you're looking at, going back decades, and you're looking at, one study on one pathway or one enzyme or whatever, that one researcher is focusing on that one thing, and then another researcher over here, another article here and here and here, it takes that big viewpoint and the huge drive to look at all of it all at once. So you had a high demand to save your life. So you're
I did.
the person to like put it all together. Now, 3 years ago, I had toxic mold poisoning from my previous office, and I was breathing it in, and it settled in my heart, and the horrible pain right here, and then through the lungs, and it affected me from head to toe. I had all these symptoms, and then I was so driven to find out what the heck was going on, and I didn't find the black mold for a year, but 9 months before that, I started taking supplements that made me feel better, and that information came from the 1930s. But the reason why I'm saying that is because I had this tremendous drive because I didn't think I would survive. I thought I was dying, horrible high blood pressure and pain and stuff. But that's just another point that I want to say is that you came up with it because you had run out of options. Because you had cancer 3 times: 1994, 1997, and then
2003, and then actually I had another spike in my markers in 2004. So I took my whole cocktail again, but I actually added a bit more that time, but they were more the natural things on top at that point. That was enough. I mean, it was actually adding more berberine in second time round in 2004, and that seemed to block enough of the pathways, because I probably wasn't blocking the glucose side maybe strongly enough. So it was just, and it's this metabolic flexibility of the cancer, which is really key, that it can rework it itself and use all those different angles and come in at different ways.
Right. So you had it 4 times.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's pretty amazing. So now this one was published last year, but did you have an earlier version from before?
June. It was the hardback version.
Okay.
So yeah, June last year was the hardback, and then September for the paperback. And I've kind of made that the paperback is a slightly updated version of the hardback. So don't get the hardback anymore.
Okay, don't get the hardback. So are you getting some good reception then from oncologists or medical centers?
Yes. Yeah,
okay, good.
Unbelievably, I am getting feedback from oncologists and researchers and obviously patients. Patients, love it. It's kind of an instruction manual, but it's also an instruction manual for the oncologists as well, and something they can work with the oncologists to try and work it out together, because it's a new frontier. The whole metabolic side is something that nobody else has properly covered in a big way. People have talked about glycolysis, they've talked about glutaminolysis a little bit, but I've got, we've got protective autophagy in there, which is something people don't understand. I've got lots of other, in the upregulated oxphos, which is what people don't understand, is that the mitochondria aren't just dysfunctional in cancer, which is kind of the initial theory that Otto Warburg had, but actually it's moved on from there. So he was partially right, but actually there's a lot more going on, and all these other things have sort of since been discovered.
Right, you're saying hyperoxidative phosphate, hypermitochondrial function, right? Which is
exactly. So it's an abnormal oxphos process that's using glutamine, that can also use lactate. So the lactate actually comes in from the fibroblasts. So the cancer cell sometimes will just send out signals to the surrounding fibroblasts. The fibroblasts will then do the glycolysis, produce all the lactate. So you're still getting lactate in the area. It's still an acid environment, but the lactate is then being pushed back in. So you've got lactate transporters pushing it back into the cancer cell, and the cancer cell reconverts that to pyruvate, which then goes back into the Krebs cycle. So you've got a reverse effect.
Right.
So the lactate is not only being secreted, it's also being pushed back in. It's a right old complex mess, and some of the cells are doing the glycolysis, some of them are doing the oxphos. You've got a real heterogeneous mix of different cells doing different things, and that's why you just cannot rely on just blocking glycolysis. Not going to work.
Right.
You've got to do much more than that.
That's amazing. So now the process for a cancer patient to research what their cancer is feeding off of, you had mentioned in the book, and you said it might take 30 minutes if somebody who's a bit experienced, it might take 30 minutes. If somebody who's new, it may take longer. So can
That's
you
if
tell?
they understand it.
Right. So I need you
But
tell us
I
what
mean,
that is.
okay, a brief overview on how to sort of research your cancer. First thing you need to do is actually type the words in metabolic phenotype, and then you add your own cancer. So you put breast cancer or whatever it is, ovarian or, whatever. So you put that in Google and see what comes up. And then you can start adding different things on the fuel lines on my metro map there. So you can add things like statin and breast cancer, or mevolonate pathway and cancer, or plus your own particular cancer. So so that would work on that pathway. So you can either type in the drug that it targets or that works on it, or you can type in the actual pathway, and you kind of work through each pathway on the cancer to see whether that is specific to you, whether it is more upregulated. Actually, the metro map, to be fair, is pretty much upregulated a lot of that with most cancers. Pretty much all of them will use most of those pathways. But actually, interestingly, prostate cancer, as I was discussing with you earlier, doesn't actually use glycolysis, which is the glucose, to fuel itself until it's androgen insensitive. So much later on, when it's much more advanced, it then does use the glycolysis pathway, but actually it's quite unique in that it doesn't really use it at all up until that point. It's using glutamine, and it's driven very much by this uptake of fat. So that's quite unique. But most of the cancers will uptake a lot of fat. They will use the glucose side first, and then as it becomes more aggressive, they'll use the glutamine side. But there are some cancers that start straight off by using the glutamine side, and then the glucose side is sort of added later. So it does vary from cancer to cancer, but these are specific, these are variations on a theme effectively. So for example, pancreatic cancer uses a pathway called macropinocytosis. This is a slightly odd way of feeding, and this is this protective autophagy, which is where the cell ruffles and pulls in fat and glutamine from the and glucose as well, but it pulls in anything it can into its lysosomes to digest, to create fuel. And this is actually its main pathway. It's a sort of a protective mechanism to keep the cancer cell fueled, and it's the very aggressive form of feeding, which actually most stage 4 cancers will use this. So if you got stage 4, you have to look at blocking the protective autophagy, in my view. Okay. And this is actually something that not many people know about, but it's something that is upregulated very much in pancreatic cancer. But if you don't block that one first, if you block the weaker pathways, you kind of make that stronger.
Yeah.
So you've got to be a little bit careful about which ones you go for first, and it's best to go for, unless you just block the whole lot first off, and then,
right.
And you're kind of.
And you had mentioned that in your book, most cancers, and you listed out the various herbs and drugs to start with. Yeah. If somebody's totally lost, they can just start with a handful of
a full package, which is a lot, and it is a lot of But actually, it's when you look at the pathways, there are drugs on there like metformin, which will cover 3 or 4 different pathways. So even though it looks like you might have to take a lot, and on the right it blocks OXPHOS, and on the bottom it helps with aspirin to block fatty acid synthesis down at the bottom. So it works on several pathways.
Nice.
So it's a multi-talented nutrient, and also drug rather, but berberine does work on many parts of that's on the acetate pathway, which is down bottom left, which is part of the ketone. It's a sort of an upregulated ketone pathway, which BRAF cancers use that particularly.
Okay. And there's berberine there.
Cancers can mutate to use the BRAF. So it's so although it looks like you might need to have a huge number of drugs, actually, when you break it down, there's a lot of repetition in that with some of the things that you can take. So it ends up being a lesser cocktail than you first imagine.
Right. Yeah, when I was really researching lactic acidosis over the last 3 years, the DCA came up as a potential solution for that. But, having
Right.
seen this, it's like, well, this is just one small piece of the whole
Yeah.
puzzle, and it might work, depends on the cancer. But you were saying, so you Google search the type of cancer plus the
Yeah.
metabolic pathway, and then based on that, then you find the metabolic pathway, and what's the solution?
Yeah.
Okay,
In general, you start by doing a general sort of type of your particular type of cancer, because every type of cancer has a metabolic signature. So it does, it'll work on a particular, it'll use some of those pathways particularly. So it'll like glutamine, or it'll like glucose, or it'll, like fatty acid oxidation, for example. So, it'll prefer some of those routes.
Okay.
And you've got to work out which ones those are, and focus on getting those blocked, and then focus on blocking the other ones after. But if you go for the wrong ones first, you can kind of make the ones that it does use work even harder.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of the key.
Okay, I want to switch.
That's why some things work in some cancer patients and it doesn't for others, and they don't know why.
Yeah.
But it's really a matter of understanding the pathways and what drives your cancer first.
Okay, cool. Let's talk about this. Okay, so what we have is press and then pulse. So you're starving the cancer cells here, and then you kill them, and the term for killing is apoptosis. So this is where you said non-aspirin or NSAID plus a statin drug, IV vitamin C, right? Like that's that part. And here we have normalizing cell signaling, and then the triangle that we just talked about, and then blocking any sort of growth or metastasis of the cancer by inhibiting growth factors. And then this is an enzyme that also can spread growth, MMP. So go ahead. I don't know this as well as you do.
Yeah, I kind of pinched this concept from Professor Siegfried, actually, because he liked the press pulse approach, which is in creating an environmental stress. He looked at it in the environment of sort of what happens when you get an eradication of a population of a particular organism, and you tend to get a stress. So there is an environmental stress on them. So maybe there might be a little bit of shortage of food or something, and then you get something killing them off when they're weak. And this is kind of the same approach. So you want to starve it and make it weak, and then you want to give it that kill pulse. And actually, it's much easier once you've got them starved and they're actually a little bit weak. Killing them off becomes so much easier.
Okay.
And that's the key, because at the moment, all we're doing is just piling in the chemo, piling on the radiotherapy, and actually, you'll see missing from that is my immune responses as well, because I've taken that out, because I think actually if you can get those bits right, you can then work on the immune system much easier. So that's kind of my approach, is to sort of work on the immune system once you've got that under control.
Oh yeah, that's right. It's in the book. Yeah.
Yeah, because the production of lactate helps to transform these macrophages into tumor-associated macrophages, and this is why we get the spread and the sort of the switching off of the immune system. So if we can control lactate by just switching off all of those metabolic pathways and the cell signaling and the growth factors, that is key to actually being able to then create more of the immune response. But if you're killing the cancer cell, you are allowing more tumor infiltrating lymphocytes into the area anyway.
Oh.
So it's much weaker, and then you kind of get this upregulation of the immune system anyway. So that's kind of where I stand from looking at it.
Yeah, awesome. So let me add. So here you have low dose chemo and then oxygen therapy, so hyperbaric oxygen. But this says non-aspirin NSAID. That's one term right there. So aspirin is just a little bit too weak in this. But I want to share with you, back in 2016 when I was suffering from the black mold, and then reading these old medical and nutrition textbooks from the 1930s and 20s, they're talking about lactic acidosis. And I was like, well, that's obviously what I have. Even though the cause was black mold, the mechanism of my symptoms was the lactic acidosis. Now, a few months later, I had a cancer patient come in. Her son was my employee. Now, she had been through chemo and surgeries. She had lung cancer that metastasized to her brain. And so I got her into ketosis, not knowing anything that you're talking about because it was 3 years ago. But 6 weeks later, after being in ketosis, all of her tumors had stopped growing. And at the hospital, they were totally baffled by that. And she said to me, but I'm even though I'm better, I'm still crying every day. So that's when I was like, oh, that's lactic acidosis, right? The pain, the grief, the mental stuff. So I put her on some supplements for that were designed in 1934. And then within 6 weeks, all the tumors were gone, and she was smiling and laughing and making jokes. So I'm just saying, like, yeah, and there's a website, cancertutor.com, and they talk about that if somebody has a diagnosis of cancer, you got to clean the blood of lactate, certainly. So that does play a role, yeah.
Yeah, that's Jonathan Stigall. He's,
from cancertutor.com?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's knowledgeable. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Okay, cool. All right.
Yeah. So, yeah, we're very much on the same page there. And lactate is a problem. And that is key to stopping it's either the glycolysis or the reverse Wahlberg. It's all of these factors coming together, creating a toxic environment, which just furthers the growth of the cancer.
Right.
So,
yeah. Let's talk about the cause. Okay, so in your book, you talk about, let's say somebody's overweight and just having extra fat on your body, then the fat cells are creating interleukin 6, which is a inflammatory cytokine, which means it's an enzyme that causes damage. So over a long period of time, you get the inflammation just by being overweight, right? And then you hit on a few others that aren't coming to my mind. So go ahead and comment on that.
Okay, well, there are some pathogen receptors on the surface of the cell called toll-like receptors. They are kind of these ancient pathogen receptors, and these can be upregulated. Well, they are upregulated in cancer. So I think it's a complex picture, So you can have this low-grade interleukin 6 happening from all sorts of different causes. You can have it from the obesity. You can have it from maybe long-term exposure to carcinogens. Long-term, it's just there
like
are very
low-grade
many
infection too. Like a low-grade infection too, or
So it's a kind of ongoing low-grade inflammatory process, and then if you stick on top of that maybe some pathogens or whatever. I think it's a mix. People kind of like to hang their hat on one thing, and I think it's more than that. I think it is a complex picture, because some people smoke. They never get cancer, Other people do, and they get it straight away. So, it's very much it's not, it can't be just one thing. There are very many things that can drive cancer and cause it. And I think people do tend to get fixated on trying to find just that single thing that causes it. And it's wrong. So
as I'm reading your book and talking about the causes of cancer, there were 5 things that you mentioned, but they actually came down to 3 things. Let me grab a board. I'll be right back. I got one hanging on the wall. Give me a second. So this is a board that I made. This is from the founders of medicine from the 30s. And there are several of them. They said you got to treat the cause mechanism and then feed the organs to get rid of symptoms. Yeah. So in the cause section, the main causes are the carcinogens, the toxins, the pathogens, and then there's the excess sugar metabolism, being overweight, glycolysis, like that. Wow. So when I'm reading your book, I'm like, that's this board. You're saying exactly what. And I made this last year at some point.
Right.
So we're totally on the same page.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. Good. And then there are you get this upregulation on the surface of the cancer cell of certain triggering factors for cancer. So certain things get upregulated called Win, Notch, Hedgehog. There's another one as well. But these all kind of drive the cancer, and they can change the nature of how it expresses itself. So that's why you get, and this varies again from cancer to cancer. So you need to look at the phenotype of the cancer to see whether that particular thing might be upregulated in your cancer or not. But there are supplements. There are, the metformin actually works on some of these things too. So does berberine, and so does, there are supplements like luteolin, which is great. It's a really good supplement for cancer. And that helps to downregulate the Notch signaling. So there are certain things that you can take to help, stop these cell signals which get triggered at the beginning of cancer, and they drive it right the way through. So these, again, it's not just about starving the cancer, it's actually cutting off and switching off those cell signals, and also blocking off the growth factors as well, because some cancers have more MMP2, some have more MMP9. So, you've got different factors that you need to consider. It's not just about what I describe as my metro map, because it can go in from different sort of metro fuel lines. It's not just the bit in the middle, it's looking either side as well at the cell signaling and the growth factors, which you've got to investigate as well. I'm afraid at this point in time, the cancer patient, the onus is on them to work it out, because the oncologists haven't got it yet. So,
right. So for an oncologist who's interested in learning this and they're going to buy the book and start working on it, I could see that it would take a few years to really get a handle, right?
I would hope less than that.
Well, I know, but to really work with it and say, oh, you got pancreatic cancer, we're going to start right here, and you have this cancer, we're going to start right here, to really handle it. It's going to, but it's in here though.
Oncologists know that they have specialties, obviously. So you have hematologists, and they have their own special cancers that they work with, and they should have some clue about the kind of driving factors, even though they may not know how to treat them. They should have hopefully some understanding of that, and then they can work on that and look at the book and try and work it out as well. But obviously, I think people do need more information on that. People do like to have a kind of a checklist. This is great for breast cancer, blah, 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 and this is good for lung cancer, take this, that, and the other. And then, they go, great, we worked it out, job done. I think that probably, I'm going to have to work a bit more on each individual cancer for people in the future, which is another research nightmare. But, I suppose I've kind of opened up a new avenue for people. So it's putting it out there, and then people are having to do a little bit of work themselves. But
right. Well, I'm sure you'll get assistance from other people contributing the information and doing their own Pubmed and compiling data. Yeah, you'll get a small army of people helping you. Yeah.
Oh yeah. And patients are very helpful with that. I've got a Facebook group where people comment, and they post a lot of information, so that if people do feel they're a bit lost, they can go on there and they can help themselves by researching their own cancer types. So people are welcome to join my Facebook group.
And it's called How to Starve Cancer.
That's my book group, but I've also got a group dedicated to looking not just at the drugs I mention in the book, but there are sort of a greater number of drugs that can actually have an inhibiting effect on cancer. So I have one called Jane McLelland Off-Label Drugs for Cancer. Bit of a mouthful, but it's a closed group. I didn't want it to be sort of open for all sorts of people to be pushing their cannabis and stuff. I'm trying to make it very much more focused on the off-label drugs. There are lots of other sites that do all the other stuff. I'm trying to make it very different, but I have professors on my site. I have top researchers on my site. I have many doctors, and they all contribute occasionally, which is great. And we can tag them into posts occasionally and get their comments. So it's quite unusual in that respect. Not many doctors join Facebook or are happy to join some of these cancer groups, but they like mine, which is good.
Yeah, awesome.
I like that too.
Yeah, good.
So yeah.
All right, cool.
So it's doing very well, and we get lots of comments, and I think people do find it very, very useful.
Yeah. Now you had said off-label drugs, but also off-patent, right?
Yeah.
And some over the
Yeah,
counter,
so
of course. Yeah.
Okay, so if people want to know what off-label means, it just means that the drug was not considered to be a cancer drug when it was first developed. So it had this other indication. So metformin, for example, is for diabetes, dipyridamole for stroke patients, and statins for high cholesterol. So all of these things were developed for a condition other than cancer, and it's off-label because the label doesn't specify that it is for cancer. So that's why it's called off-label. So I hope people aren't confused by that, but that's what I'm talking about, drugs that have not been approved for cancer but have these anti-cancer effects.
Yeah, nice. And then some are off patent, so the price goes way down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, exactly. So then they're generic, and most statins now are generic. You know, people hate statins and they say they're the worst thing in the world, but actually they have these really beneficial effects for cancer patients. Pretty much all cancer patients, all cancers will use that mevolonate pathway, some more than others. But, blocking the mevolonate pathway seems to be very beneficial. But not all statins work. So again, you can't just take any old statin. It has to be a lipophilic statin, so a fat-loving one. So there's three main ones. So there's simvastatin, atorvastatin, and the one that I used, which was lovastatin.
Right, and the time of being on the statin drug is for how long?
Again, I think it varies really on your response and really how long. This is an absolute unknown. You know, we are at the frontier of sort of new research here with doing a new protocol for patients. So it's a cocktail approach which blocks more than your average. So hopefully, once you got your cancer under control and you are then cancer-free, hopefully, if you've been in remission I took my statin on and off for 2 or 3 years, and then I came off it completely, and then I occasionally take it now, every now and then. You know, I pulse it on and off. I still have a panic every now and then.
Right. But as opposed to being on it for 30 years and losing your brain and losing your hormones.
Yeah.
And, right.
Well, exactly. I don't like statins particularly. I'd hate to be on a statin to prevent heart disease or anything. I think there are far better things to be on. But when you've got cancer, I think it has so many benefits. I think people will be foolish not to look at it as a very good therapy option. It blocks not just the mevolonate pathway, it actually blocks the GLUT1, which is your glucose receptor. So that's top on the right.
GLUT1
there. So it helps block that too. So, it's helping to block both the glucose and it helps to block the fat.
There's the mevolonate. Right there.
Yeah.
Statin.
Yeah. So, people really would be a bit silly, really, just to sort of decide not to take it. I mean, there are some natural alternatives. The red yeast rice is kind of where lovastatin kind of came from, but you'd have to take a very high dose of that in order to get a therapeutic benefit. Bergamot is another option as a sort of a natural statin, but unfortunately that upregulates the GLUT1 receptor. So you don't want to be doing that at the same, you then have to add more things to block the GLUT1. So you kind of have to have a bigger cocktail. Anyway, it's some people prefer the natural, and I have those options in the book, and at some point I'll update as I get more and more information. I will be updating probably early next year, but it's fairly comprehensive at the moment, and there's more options and things on my Facebook group for people to look at as well.
Yeah. Okay, good. All right, I think we covered a lot. I think we did a lot of information. This has been fantastic. I'm just thrilled I'm so excited to put this on my channel and have people read through it and figure this out. So I'm helping a few people figure it out right now. So I'll be looking on this information and doing some more research. So I really appreciate you. I really appreciate that you accepted my invitation to come on my channel.
Pleasure. Pleasure. I admire your work.
Okay, so I'm encouraging people to buy your book, number one, and then number two, find you on Facebook and join one of your two groups, and we'll all figure this out together. All right?
Great.
Okay, good. All right, thanks, Jane.